The Battle of Tory Island was a naval action of the French Revolutionary Wars, fought on 12 October 1798 between French and British squadrons off the northwest coast of County Donegal, then in the Kingdom of Ireland, the last action of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. The Battle of Tory Island ended the final attempt by the French Navy to land substantial numbers of soldiers in Ireland during the war. The Society of United Irishmen, led by Wolfe Tone, launched an uprising against British rule in Ireland in May 1798. At the request of the rebels, a small French force under General Humbert was landed at Killala, County Mayo. But by early September both this expedition and the rebellion had been defeated. Unaware of Humbert's surrender, the French dispatched reinforcements on 16 September. Having missed one invasion force, the Royal Navy was on alert for another, and when the squadron carrying the reinforcements left Brest they were soon spotted. After a long chase, the French were brought to battle in a bay off the rugged County Donegal coast in the west of Ulster, very close to Tory Island. During the action, the outnumbered French attempted to escape, but were run down and defeated piecemeal, with the British capturing 4 ships and scattering the survivors. Over the next fortnight, British frigate patrols scoured the passage back to Brest, capturing 3 more ships. Of the 10 ships in the original French squadron, only 2 frigates and a schooner reached safety. British losses in the campaign were minimal. The battle marked the last attempt by the French Navy to launch an invasion of any part of the British Isles. It also ended the last hopes the United Irishmen had of obtaining outside support in their struggle with the British. After the action, Tone was recognized aboard the captured French flagship and arrested. He was brought ashore by the British at Buncrana, on the Inishowen Peninsula. He was later tried for treason, convicted, and committed suicide while in prison in Dublin, hours before he was to be hanged. Background: Britain's enemies in continental Europe had long recognized Ireland as a weak point in Britain's defences. Landing troops there was a popular strategic goal, not only because an invader could expect the support of a large proportion of the native population, but also because at least initially they would face fewer and less reliable troops than elsewhere in the British Isles. Additionally, embroiling the British Army in a protracted Irish campaign would reduce its availability for other theatres of war. The rhetoric of the French Revolution inspired many Irishmen to fight for similar principles of liberty, equality, and brotherhood in their own nation. Liberty in this context largely meant independence from Great Britain. With these goals in mind, in 1791 Dublin lawyer Wolfe Tone founded the Society of United Irishmen, allying itself with the French Republic. The society was suppressed by the British authorities and forced to go underground when war broke out between France and Great Britain in 1793. Tone and other members secretly travelled to France to convince the French National Convention to invade Ireland. Such an invasion, they argued, could rely on support from large numbers of Irish irregulars, and if successful would strike a severe blow to the British war effort, perhaps even severe enough to force Britain to seek peace. Invasion attempts. French political divisions made organising an operation against Ireland difficult. The process was further hampered by the French Atlantic Fleet's defeat in 1794 at the glorious 1st of June and the disastrous Croisade du Grand Hiver operation in 1795. Having lost many of its best officers during the political purges of the Terror, these defeats bred a negative mentality in the French Navy, discouraging adventurous strategic thinking. Eventually, the Expedition d'Irlande was dispatched in December 1796 under Admiral Morad de Gaulle, consisting of 17 ships of the line and 27 smaller vessels, and carrying as many as 25,000 men. Despite elements of the force spending up to a week in Bantry Bay, not a single French soldier was successfully landed, and the expedition was a total disaster, with 13 ships lost and over 2,000 men drowned. The following year Tone and his companions tried again, this time persuading the government of the Netherlands, then under French occupation, to prepare their own expedition. During 1797, the Dutch fleet was readied and provisioned, and in October sailed for Brest, intending to combine with the French fleet and launch a second invasion attempt. The Dutch fleet had only been at sea a few hours when they were confronted by the Royal Navy's North Sea Fleet under Admiral Sir Adam Duncan. Duncan immediately attacked, and in the ensuing Battle of Camperdown captured or destroyed 10 ships and scattered the rest. The French fleet never left port. Rebellion of 1798. Hoping to capitalize on the spontaneous uprising that spread across Ireland in May 1798, Commodore Daniel Savary led a third, and more successful, effort. He took a small frigate squadron flying false British colours to Killala, and in August landed 1,150 French troops under General Humbert. A larger force would have been dispatched, but the French had been caught unprepared. The Irish Rebellion had originally been planned to coincide with a later French landing, but British intelligence operations had infiltrated the United Irishmen and arrested much of its leadership, prompting a precipitate revolt. Although the uprising achieved some early successes, by the time Humbert arrived its outcome had already been decided with the defeat of successive rebel armies by British troops. Humbert's force was joined by many United Irishmen and had some initial success, but was unable to face superior British numbers at the Battle of Ballinamuck, and surrendered on the 8th of September, although its small size allowed it to reach Ireland unobserved. Neither Savary's frigate squadron nor the army it carried were large enough to have a significant impact on the campaign. Bompart's mission. Unaware that Humbert had surrendered and the rebellion been defeated, the French prepared a follow-up expedition under the command of Commodore Jean-Baptiste François Bompart. 3,000 men were embarked aboard the ship of the line Hoche and 8 frigates, the force departing Brest on the 16th of September. However, having missed Savary's frigate squadron, the Royal Navy were more watchful. Roving frigate patrols cruised off the principal French ports and in the approaches to Ireland, while squadrons of battleships from the Channel Fleet sailed nearby, ready to move against any new invasion force. In command of the squadron on the Irish station was Commodore Sir John Borlase Warren, a highly experienced officer who had made a name for himself raiding the French coast early in the war. Bompart's squadron departed Brest late in the evening, hoping to slip past the inshore British blockade in the dark. However, they took too long to navigate the Raz Passage, and were spotted at dawn on the 17th of September by a frigate squadron under Captain Richard Goodwin Keats, in HMS Boadicea. Keats immediately divided his forces, ordering HMS Ethelian under Captain George Countess and the brig HMS Sylph under Commander John Chambers White to follow the French force, while Keats brought news of the French movements to Admiral Lord Bridport, Admiral of the Channel Fleet. Countess's pursuit. Aware of the British pursuit, Bompart nevertheless continued to the north. Countess followed closely, and was joined on the 18th of September by HMS Amelia under Captain Charles Herbert. Initially north of the French, Amelia had spotted the chase the previous day and caught up during the night by passing silently through Bompart's squadron. The next day, Bompart attempted to throw off his pursuers by feinting towards Lorient, and again the following day by feinting south, as if travelling towards the Antilles. However, the British captains remained on track, and by the 20th of September were only 9 miles from Bompart's force, which was continuing southwest as though sailing for the Americas. HMS Anson, a large Razy frigate under Captain Philip Charles Durham, joined the British force on the 20th of September, despite Bompart's attempts to disguise his destination. By the evening of the 23rd of September, Countess had correctly deduced the French were heading for Ireland. Ing dispatched the brig Sylph to warn Commodore Warren and any other British ships she came across. 2 days later, on the 25th of September, Commodore Bompard was forced to halt to the eastern Lough ground to his pursuers when a 100-ship British convoy passed to the north. This convoy consisted of many well-armed East Indiamen, protected by several frigates, and posed a serious threat to Bompard's overloaded ships. He then tried to drive off pursuit by feinting towards Countess's squadron, but the faster British ships simply withdrew to a safe distance, resuming their chase once the French had returned to their original course. On the 29th of September, Bompard made a final bid to shake his pursuers. He attempted to engage the British frigates with 3 of his own, Immortality, Loire and another. This plan failed after his flagship Pocock lost a topmast in heavy weather and fell behind the rest of the squadron, forcing the frigates to return to her protection. Unable to escape, Bompard finally abandoned his pretense of sailing for the Americas and instead turned northwest. During the next day, high winds cost both Pocock and Anson a topmast, slowing both squadrons. But the repairs to Pocock were conducted faster and the French were able to pull ahead. For 4 more days pursuit continued directly north, until the 4th of October, when a storm descended and Bompard successfully outran Countess in the increasing darkness. In the high winds, Amelia was driven off course and away from her compatriots on the 7th of October, while Anson again suffered damage, this time losing 2 topmasts. On the 11th of October the weather cleared, and spotting 2 sails to the south, Countess took Heatherly to investigate. The ships were Amelia and the ship of the line of Warren's squadron, who, having received Sylph's warning on the 23rd of September, was sailing north in an attempt to intercept the French. Warren's squadron of 3 ships of the line and the Raisy frigate HMS Magnanime had been joined the day before by 2 additional frigates stationed at Lough Swilly, HMS Melampus under Captain Graham Moore and HMS Doris under Captain Lord Ranelagh. Warren attached Melampus to his squadron and detached Doris to scout along the Irish coast and warn the British garrisons, especially along the coast of County Donegal and the northwest of Ireland region generally. Doris was also to scout along part of the coast of the west of Ireland region, further south, where the previous French landing had been effected at Killala. Warren's pursuit having finally eluded his pursuers, Bompard made directly for Lough Swilly, where the landing was scheduled to take place. Unaware of the rebellion's defeat, he hoped that Humbert's army would be operating in the Lough Swilly area, as intended in the campaign planned before Humbert left France. Arriving off the coast, Bompard searched for a suitable landing site but was unable to find one before dark on the 10th of October. He waited out the night close to Tory Island, but was surprised the next day by sails on the horizon. Warren's squadron had been joined by Countess's ships, and an overwhelming force was bearing down on the French. Abandoning all notions of landing the troops, Bompard hauled his ships close to the wind to give them room to maneuver and allow their captains as much opportunity as possible to escape the approaching British. Throughout the day, Warren's squadron closed from the northeast while Bompard made frantic efforts to reach open water. Both fleets were hindered by a gale which swept the sea shortly before 2000. All 3 of Hoche's topmasts were blown down and her mizzensail shredded, leaving her substantially slower than her compatriots and forcing them to hold back in her defense. Other ships suffered too, as the French Résolue sprang a severe leak and HMS Anson lost her mizzenmast and several topmasts. During the night, Bompard attempted to decoy the British by sending the schooner Biker with orders for the frigate Résolue, commanding Captain Jean-Pierre Barjot, to beach his ship and fire flares in the hope of distracting Warren from his pursuit. For unknown reasons this order was never carried out, and in the morning Warren was still hard behind Bompard, whose ships were now sailing in 2 uneven lines. Warren's force was even more dispersed, with HMS Robust and HMS Magnanime 4 nautical miles astern of the French and gaining fast. Amelia and Melampus shortly behind them, and Warren's flagship HMS Canada with HMS Foudroyant under Captain Sir Thomas Byard, KT, 8 nautical miles from the enemy. The other British ships were scattered throughout this formation except Anson, which was wallowing to the rear, far out of sight. Realizing that he could not escape and would have to fight his way past the British, Bompard formed his squadron into a battle line and turned westwards, waiting for Warren's signal for the attack. Because of the dispersed nature of his squadron, Warren did not issue this signal until 700. When he ordered Robust to steer for the French line and attack Hoche directly. Captain Edward Thornborough of Robust obeyed immediately and closed with the French, firing into the frigate's embuscade and cockerel as he passed, before closing with Hoche at 8:50, beginning a bitter close-range artillery duel. Minutes later Magnanime joined the action, firing on the rear frigates and engaging the French van of Immortalite, Loire and Bellona, which had worn out of the line in an attempt to rake her. The next 3 British ships into action, Ethelian, Melampus and Amelia, all raked the isolated Hoche as they passed, before pressing on sail to pursue the French frigates, now making distance to the southwest. Canada and the subsequent British ships all ignored Hoche except to fire a few distant shots. By the time they passed, the ship was clearly a wreck, having been pounded repeatedly by Robust and Magnanime. Bompard finally surrendered at 10:50 with 270 of his crew and passengers killed or wounded. Embuscade was the next to surrender, having been battered in the opening exchanges by Magnanime, and further damaged by long-range fire from Foudroyant during the pursuit. Overhauled by several larger British ships, Captain de la Roncière surrendered at 11:30 rather than allow his ship to be destroyed. Magnanime, suffering the effects of her engagement with Hoche, took possession of Embuscade and continued to follow slowly behind the rest of the fleet, while Robust, which had suffered severely in her duel with Hoche, remained alongside her erstwhile opponent to take possession. The direction of the French squadron's flight, following the direction of the wind, took them across the path of the straggling British ships, beginning with the Foudroyant. Most of the frigates were able to outrun this ponderous enemy, but Bellona was less fortunate, and a speculative shot from the battleship detonated a case of grenades in one of her topmasts. This began a disastrous fire which was eventually brought under control, but at a significant cost in speed. She was soon closely attacked by Melampus and suffered further damage. Nearby, the struggling cockerel surrendered after being outrun by the approaching Canada. Warren ordered the slowly following Magnanime to take possession. Ethelian took over pursuit of Bellona from Melampus, and for 2 hours maintained continuous fire with her bow chases on the French ship. Ethelian was faster than her quarry, and she slowly pulled parallel with Bellona during the afternoon, but could not get close enough for a decisive blow. It took another 2 hours of pursuit before the battered Bellona eventually surrendered. Hoche apart, Bellona had suffered more casualties than any other ship present. To the south of this conflict, the struggling Anson discovered herself in danger when the surviving frigates of the French vanguard swept towards her en masse. Captain Durham was initially confused by their approach as he had been too distant to witness the action and the French ships flew false British ensigns. But he rapidly realized their true identity and at 1600 opened fire on Loire. The damaged Anson was severely hampered by her inability to maneuver, and so could do nothing when the French ships pulled back and sailed away, except to continue to fire until they were out of range. During the evening, the surviving French frigates gradually pulled away from their pursuers and disappeared into the gathering night, leaving behind 4 of their squadron, including their flagship, as captives.